On a warm, quiet afternoon in the outskirts of Larkwood Valley, as sunlight streamed through the tall trees and the world felt unusually peaceful, a single father named Arden Cole had no idea his life was about to shift in a direction he could never have imagined. He was returning from his part-time mechanic job, shoulders heavy but mind calm, when he suddenly froze at the sound of soft whimpering near the old bridge that crossed the shallow stream behind his neighborhood. At first, he assumed it was an animal, but as he stepped closer, he found a tiny girl, no older than 5, sitting alone on a patch of wildflowers, hugging her knees, her face streaked with tears, her hair tangled as if she had been wandering for hours. And in that single moment, as her frightened eyes lifted toward him, Arden realized this was not just a lost child. This was the beginning of something extraordinary, something life-altering, something meant for him. But if you believe kindness can rewrite destinies and second chances can change lives, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Hope in Action. Your support keeps stories of compassion alive. Arden carefully approached the small girl who wore a pale yellow sundress smudged with dust and grass. She didn't speak, only clung to a tiny stuffed bear whose ear was nearly torn off. There was an unexplainable tug in Arden's chest, the same instinct he had felt the day his own daughter, Marin, had been placed into his arms 6 years earlier. Being a single dad hadn't been simple, especially after losing Marin's mother to illness shortly after childbirth, but Arden had raised his daughter with steady devotion and quiet strength. And now, looking at this trembling child who seemed dropped into his path by fate itself, something in him felt the familiar pull of responsibility and protection. He lifted her gently and carried her home, hoping she would speak, hoping she would tell him something, anything, about who she was. When they entered the small, weathered house he fought so hard to maintain, Marin ran forward in excitement, her usual spark lighting up the room. She immediately offered the lost girl her favorite crayons and a piece of soft bread, and Arden watched with amazement as the stranger's trembling slowed, replaced by a fragile sense of safety. Throughout the afternoon, he tried to ask her simple questions, but she only whispered her name in a shaky breath, Tessa, and fell silent again. Arden didn't know where to begin searching, but he knew one thing with certainty: until he understood who she belonged to, she would be protected in his home just like his own daughter. As hours passed, Arden contacted local authorities, but no child matching Tessa's description had been reported missing. The officers promised to update him if anything surfaced, but Arden sensed they were overwhelmed with multiple cases that day. So he stayed alert, watching over the two girls as they played under the warm afternoon sun filtering through the window. Something about Tessa's wide-eyed way of absorbing everything, from the humming of the fridge to the sight of sunlight touching Marin's hair, made him feel she hadn't been in a place this peaceful for a long time. Her reactions were almost as if she had been hidden away from the world, as if she had never known what a safe home felt like. Over the next few hours, Arden gently introduced her to little comforts: warm soup, a soft blanket, a chance to rest, but she kept glancing toward the window as though expecting someone to appear. Marin, sensing the girl's fear, stayed at her side like a guardian angel, offering smiles, flowers from the backyard, and even her most cherished marble collection. The scene filled Arden with both warmth and ache. He knew this peace would be temporary, because somewhere out there someone must be desperately searching for her. But no call came, no alert popped up, and no car showed up at his front door. Instead, evening sunlight began sinking into gold as if time was slowing down around them. At about 3 in the afternoon, while Tessa finally dozed off on the small couch with Marin beside her, Arden stepped outside to breathe and think. He wondered what kind of home she came from, and why no one had come forward. His own struggles as a single father often felt like mountains on his shoulders, but even at his hardest, he would have torn the world apart if Marin ever disappeared. So why wasn't anyone tearing through town looking for Tessa? The question burrowed into him until he had no choice but to prepare for whatever revelation would eventually arrive, and it arrived sooner than he expected. Just before sunset, a black luxury SUV sped down the quiet road toward his house, kicking up dust behind it. The vehicle looked wildly out of place in their humble neighborhood. Arden's heart pounded as the SUV screeched to a stop. The door flew open and a tall, sharply dressed woman stepped out, elegance in every movement, but with desperation shadowing her features. Her eyes burned with a frantic hunger as though she had been searching the ends of the earth for something that kept slipping through her fingers. Arden knew immediately that this was someone connected to Tessa. The woman identified herself as Serafina Vale, and her name hit Arden like a quiet thunder. She wasn't just any mother, she was one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in the state, a woman featured in magazines and articles for her innovations, success, and power. Yet at that moment, she didn't look powerful. She looked broken. And when she finally saw Tessa asleep through the window, her entire body collapsed into trembling relief. Arden realized then that billionaires cry the same way the rest of humanity does when the heart shatters, but what came next shook him deeper than he expected. Serafina revealed in a strained, trembling voice that Tessa had not been kidnapped or lost in the traditional sense. She had been kept hidden by Serafina's estranged ex-husband, a man fighting a legal war for control and money. He had taken Tessa under the guise of a weekend visit, but instead disappeared with her for days. Serafina had spent every second searching with private investigators and police, terrified of what he might do. The man had serious mental health struggles and erratic behavior, and Serafina feared he had vanished with the child to manipulate her during their ongoing corporate battle. But that morning, after an argument between the man and someone helping him, Tessa had managed to escape. She must have wandered miles through the valley until she reached Arden's neighborhood, drawn perhaps by the sound of children playing nearby. Arden listened in stunned silence, his heart tightening for reasons beyond the story itself. Something about Serafina's raw grief, her startling humanity under the billionaire image, and her desperate love for her child struck him deeply. She thanked him for protecting Tessa, her voice cracking, but when she reached for the sleeping girl, Tessa woke up suddenly, terrified, clinging to Arden instead. That single moment, that tiny pair of hands grabbing his shirt as though he were safety itself, made Serafina freeze. And then, instead of reacting with jealousy or anger, she sank to her knees and whispered her gratitude in a way that carried more truth than any headline ever written about her. She wasn't angry that her daughter clung to a stranger, she was grateful someone had given Tessa comfort when she needed it most. As the sun dipped lower, Arden allowed Serafina into his home, and the three adults moved quietly while Marin held Tessa's hand. Serafina watched Arden interact with the girls, and an unexpected softness came to her gaze. She explained that her world, despite the money, the fame, the power, had become a cold cage, filled with battles and betrayals. Tessa had been sheltered, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Her father's unpredictability had made it dangerous to expose her to the public. And Serafina had been juggling corporate warfare while trying to raise a child alone. Seeing Arden's home, small but filled with warmth, made something inside her shift. Before leaving, Serafina asked Arden if she could stay in touch, not out of obligation, but out of respect and deep gratitude. Something about him, about the way he cared for both girls, felt like a healing presence she hadn't encountered in years. Arden nodded quietly, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a quiet connection that would grow in ways neither of them expected. Days passed, and Serafina kept her promise. She returned often with updates, sometimes with gifts for Marin, sometimes with coffee for Arden. And though their worlds had been galaxies apart, their shared love for their children created a bridge between them. Arden found himself smiling more, feeling less alone. Serafina found herself breathing easier, discovering pockets of peace she thought no longer existed in her life. Their bond grew naturally, softly, like sunlight slowly melting morning frost, and through it all, Tessa and Marin became inseparable, two little souls who had crossed paths by fate, building a friendship strong enough to stitch together the hearts of the adults around them. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and subscribe to Hope in Action. Your support helps spread kindness and hope to more people. Special request: comment hope if you believe every act of kindness can change a life forever.